Hi, I'm Jason Gunsel, the author of this article, and I had the great pleasure of interviewing Major Josh Cabo Gunderson, the F-22 demonstration pilot for 2021 for the United States Air Force. It was an absolute joy to speak to the Major, and I started off by talking about our mutual love of supercars. We do have one thing in common. Uh, Aviation and supercars are my two areas that I write about. And your favorite type of car?
It is, yeah.
Which Aston Martin are you talking about? Do you have one in particular?
Well, in real people money, where something that's feasibly affordable, I would probably,
Right.
to me, like the V8 Vantage to me is just an iconic Aston. Obviously, I have the V12 as well, but to me, just the throaty exhaust and sound of the V8 is incredible. It's one of those things that just kind of stirs your soul a little bit, like it makes you just absolutely fall in love with the car. And it's not only obviously an incredibly high performing car, but it's also incredibly elegant and classy. And so yeah, I just love the car. Obviously, the DB9 is a beautiful car, right? But it's just over orders of magnitude of cost more. But yeah, the Vantage is always. I mean, especially with the new design, they have the new intake up front is just is gorgeous.
That's created some debate, controversy, I guess, on supercar people. You either like it or you don't like it. So, have you actually
Yeah.
driven the Vantage, the new one?
No, I haven't. I've seen plenty. I've never been able to drive one. Like I said, I think one of the cool things, it's not, to me, obviously cars are very, like you mentioned, very personal in terms of what you like, what you don't like. To me, a lot of the Italian makers are just a little bit over the top, a little bit gaudy for my taste, whereas the Aston's just, it's a very, very elegant car that it's kind of like I don't know, it's just a very elegant car.
Yeah. I guess we could talk cars all day, but I do want to talk about the F-22. I guess the thing that I'm really interested in, I know it's a fly-by-wire aircraft and it has thrust vectoring. But one thing that I learned when I was doing some research is you're not, well, I suppose it's a funny way of putting this, but you're not controlling the nozzles when when thrust vectoring is initiated. Is that correct?
It's true, yep.
So when you do, it's so amazing because I'm sure you've seen lots of videos and obviously you feel it, but especially when you do the tail slide and you see all the control surfaces, just it's a mesmerizing dance. And I wonder what is it like for you to fly that kind of maneuver? And in general, how does thrust vectoring, how do you work it into the flight and how does it affect how you fly?
So I guess an overall statement about the flight control system in the F-22 is that it's designed to be very easy to operate and everything works seamlessly together. So in terms of the actual vectors and the nozzles in the back, that's all integrated flight control system. So there are certain parameters that says, okay, once you get to this airspeed, this altitude, it's going to start, adding that component into the flight control computers and system to give you the effect you want. So much like everything else, whether it's rolling, pulling, whatever it is, the airplane's going to look at airspeed, altitude, angle of attack, and side slip components and figure out what combination of flight controls is going to give me for the effect I'm asking for. So when I use a stick and I roll left, I'm basically asking the airplane, I want to roll left. But based on my airspeed, it may give me a different flight control than I'm expecting that a normal airplane would use because it's just giving me the effect I'm asking for through the flight control computers. So that's in that way, the nozzles are the same way where once you get certain parameters, I'm basically just asking the airplane to keep pulling, and it's going to find a way to flip the airplane around. That's why in the power loop, for example, you'll see the airplane essentially do a backflip, and that's basically just relying upon the 70,000 pounds of thrust and the thrust vectoring.
From an F-15 to the F-22, I know you said that, you talked about the cockpit displays, and obviously it's a completely different system. But in terms of actually flying the aircraft, flying qualities, what would you say was the biggest difference?
The limits that we had in the F-15 just weren't there in the F-22. It's just in terms of performance and flying qualities, it's a very, very easy airplane to fly, and in the F-15, for example, our most fourth generation aircraft, F-15, F-16, those aircraft, each sensor on the airplane has its own screen, its own display. So you're trying to take information from one screen, from another screen, from another screen, put that all together in your brain and make a decision about what's happening in the battle space around you. And this airplane, they deliberately made the airplane very, very easy to fly. As an example, if I were to compare the best F-15 pilot I knew to the worst one, there'd be a massive disparity in terms of capabilities across those two pilots. For the F-22, that margin is much more narrow now because the airplane makes up for so much and it does a lot of things for you. And the reason they did that is, one, it makes it easier for the pilot to fly the airplane, and cross multiple age demographics of pilots. But also, there's a lot more information in the cockpit as well. So a lot more things that you process, a lot more information that's coming into you for you to kind of sort through and sift to figure out what do I need to use, what piece of information is going to help me make the right decision at this time. That was a big thing in terms of the airplanes helping you so much with those decisions. So you can make higher level decisions at a faster rate. And then the other thing in terms of flying qualities, in F-15 or F-16, you're probably playing, if we're talking to like, peer adversaries out there, you're playing, 50% offense, 50% defense. And in a Raptor, you're playing, 90% offense and 10% defense, so it's a completely different mindset of, you have the ability to do a lot of really cool things that you just weren't able to do in other airplanes.
And this may be a funny question, but what do you think is the common misnomer about the F-22?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't think I've ever gotten that one before, so thank you for asking that. Let's see. We do. I mean, this is kind of more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of one, but people, always ask, like, "Is this a stealthy airplane? I can see it," and right? It's just kind of silly because, like, I can see the airplane. You're like, I understand. We're talking about certain regimes in terms of stealth, obviously. And one of the visual things, people see it, it's airplane, obviously, but once the gear is up and the doors are closed and all that stuff, it's a very difficult airplane to see if it's pointing at you. I mean, it's very, very flat in the sky. So unless, if you're outside of a mile from somebody and you're pointing right at them, it's very difficult for them to see you unless they know precisely where to look. So that's one of the things that's kind of, like I said, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. I don't know of many other like crazy misnomers or crazy perceptions of the F-22 that exists out there. I mean, I'd be happy to entertain whatever ones you've heard and happy to answer them.
I think one of the things that I love about the F-22 is the bubble canopy. And I've always been interested, I guess this is more from an engineering point of view, but obviously the F-16 and the F-22 are really the only two that have the single piece canopy. I mean, the visibility out of that must be second to none. How is it for you to fly it with that versus, say, I mean, I know the F-15 had an excellent visibility, but it still had the main part with the
canopy bow.
Yeah.
So no, I love not having a canopy bow. It's completely unhindered in terms of your visibility, which is really nice. Just based on the form of the F-22, you sit a little bit more in the airplane. So in an F-15 or an F-16, for example, they have like that no kidding bubble canopy where it comes out and extends out a little bit. So in those airplanes, you're able to kind of see down below things a little bit easier because you're sitting higher. You're not as tucked into the airplane for form reasons. Whereas the F-22, you're tucked in a little bit more. So it's a little bit less visibility down the side of the airplane. And you also have like the chines that come out of the airplane to kind of give that diamond looking shape from the front. So those are, obscure a little bit of the view, but otherwise, I mean, those are incredibly minor points that are not really a big deal. Otherwise, I mean, the visibility in the F-22 is incredible. I mean, it's really nice to not have anything blocking the view at all.
How comfortable is it? I mean, I've never flown a military jet. I know obviously that can vary, but obviously you've flown many jets before. How does the F-22 stack up in that regime?
So the cockpit itself is physically a little bit smaller than the F-15.
Oh, really? Oh, I thought it was, I didn't know that.
It's a little bit smaller than the F-15. It is dramatically bigger than the F-16 and bigger than the F-35 cockpit. I like it. I've been flying this airplane now since 2014. So I have lots of years flying this airplane, and to me, it's very comfortable. I'm not a massive human. I'm a normal average, like 5'10" kind of human. So it's not for me, it's very comfortable. We also have a little elbow rest that sits on the right-hand side. So you actually put your elbow on this rest. And you almost feel like you're, between your hands on the throttles and your hand on the stick with the elbow rest. It kind of feels like sitting in a reclining chair, like you're sitting there and everything you do with the sensors, the weapons, everything you control is primarily done through the buttons on the throttle and stick. And you can manipulate displays, change displays, cue sensors, shoot weapons, drop bombs. You can do all that stuff with just the buttons on the stick and the throttles. So to me, it's rather comfortable. We do have some folks that are much taller than me or much shorter than me, and I haven't heard any massive complaints about it. There are plenty of little storage spaces for like water and snacks and all that stuff, especially for those longer missions. I think the longest one I've flown in this airplane was just under 12 hours. And being a cockpit for that long can definitely be taxing on the body, but you find a way to make it work. And I don't feel like it's never been anything that's made me like wish I had more. I mean, we all wish we had more space, obviously, but it's never been anything that's been inconvenience. There's always an easy solution to find to store stuff.
When you're putting together the routine, how much latitude do you have to change it from the previous pilot? Like Loco was the jet that preceded you. How much latitude do you have, or are you trying to fly relatively the same routine based on obviously what worked?
Yeah, so the routine itself was initially designed like 14 years ago by the flight test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base in California, in concert with the first demo pilot. And the routine largely hasn't changed a whole ton since then. And there's a lot of testing data that goes into developing the maneuvers, and not just like, hey, is this going to look cool? But it's also, we go through and model in simulators with, engine failures. Hey, if something happens with an engine failure at this critical time, is this recoverable? Is this, something you can't recover? And they go through and they methodically figure out what parameters were to use for the maneuvers to make sure it's safe, repeatable, looks cool. So there aren't a whole lot of things you can do to kind of adjust. There are some things, like if you were to play a demo of either Loco or any of the previous demo pilots, I've watched them enough times now that I can tell you who that pilot was, just based on how they follow the routine. And a lot of the differences really come down to how they reposition between maneuvers. There's a little bit of like, I guess, artistic license in that segment where you can kind of adjust how you do things. Is a long reposition, is a short one? How do you fly the airplane, those repositions, and you can tell in that way. But in terms of maneuvers, there largely haven't been any major changes from the routine. I will say though that I'm going down to our test facility in a couple weeks actually, and we're looking at potentially changing some things for next year. So this would be the first major change in the F-22 demonstration since its inception. So that'd be really cool. But like I said, we're going to do our due diligence of making sure that everything is safe, and even in scenarios of failure, we can recover the airplane. It's not gonna risk the airplane or myself, obviously, or the next demo pilot.
Well, it truly shows. It truly shows. Some small questions. How do you guys choose the jet? So there is a spare jet, right, for the team.
Correct. Yep.
How do you choose the jets that are going to be on the road, and are they swapped out during the year a couple of times, or is it the same couple? Obviously maintenance dependent, but as a rule, is it the same two jets for the year, or how does that work?
That's a great question. And what's really cool and unique about the F-22 demo team is that we don't own our own airplanes. So we don't have 2 or 3 airplanes dedicated to the F-22 demo team. We basically use airplanes from any combat squadron in the Air Force. And that goes to show you that, every airplane we fly is capable of doing these things. You may or may not have heard, like, for example, a lot of people look at like Russian fighters at air shows, and they're like, oh, it's so great. And you're like, I mean, it's really cool. It's a great air show airplane. But when you heavily modify the airplane for a demonstration, or you take off with, half the fuel weight to reduce the weight of the airplane to make it more, impressive at an air show, that's a very small sample size, and it's not combat representative. And one of the things that we really like about the F-22 demonstration is that everything we do, aside from actually physically putting missiles and bombs and bullets in the airplane, everything else in the airplane is completely unmodified. So I don't take off with any less gas. I take off with a full load of gas at the demonstrations, and like I said, everything we do, I take any airplane in the F-22 fleet and fly a demonstration with it. So when we go to a show, we basically work with the squadrons around the Air Force, and we say, hey, this show is geographically closer to you. Can we borrow your jets for this weekend? And that's kind of the process of how we pick jets.
What would you say that this year's highlights have been that sort of stand out for you in terms of places that you visited over the last year?
I think probably the biggest thing that stands out in my mind this year was doing a show in Lakeland, Florida. So I'm originally from Tampa, Florida, and it's a really cool show. They do a great job organizing it and all that stuff. But I think the coolest thing for me was the fact that a lot of my family was able to come out and actually watch the demonstration, and that was the first time that a lot of people in my family had ever even seen me fly an airplane. Because when I left high school when I was 17, and went to the Air Force Academy. I'm 35 now, so that's a lot of years. I'm not going to do math in public because you always embarrass yourself. But that's a lot of years where people in my family know I fly airplanes, know I fly jets, but I've been stationed in Texas and Oregon and Japan and Alaska, traveled all around the world, and a lot of them just had never seen me fly an airplane. So for them to be able to come out and kind of partake in that and not just see me fly an airplane, but do a demo, which is, I'd argue probably the most fun flying you can do. That was a really cool experience, and I love my family. They're awesome. We actually hosted the team at my uncle and aunt's house, and we had like this big cookout, and everybody went over and hung out, and it was a great time. So to me, those are the shows that I really enjoy. The location I'm kind of indifferent on the locations. I look at locations more so in the sense of how can we impact geographic areas we haven't gone to in the past? So how can we disperse ourselves across the country and across the globe in a more impactful way? And that's what I look at in terms of geography. But in terms of show locations, to me, it really comes down to the people that are there and how the environment is, and being able to do a show with my family around was just really, really cool. This is by far the best job that I could ever imagine having in my life. So very thankful for the opportunity, and thankful I have an amazing team that does an awesome job.
Well, it truly shows. It truly shows. Thank you very much for your time. It was absolutely amazing talking to you. All the best for the rest of the season, and hopefully we can touch base some other time and hopefully meet up. That'd be really great.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you taking the time to chat.